This week we're going to look at Austin, Texas, the capital of the state of Texas, once the Republic of Texas. And it's a large city, but it was not always the case. If we look at the population demographics, you can see the modern day it's about 1 million people, but if we turn the clocks back 100 years, 120 years, all we're looking at is 20,000 people. And you go back even further and you can see how small the population is. So what I'll be showing you are photographs of a small city, you might even say a town, and structures that were said to have been built at this very early time period. And as we proceed through this slideshow, I have provided approximate population demographics for when these structures were said to have been built. You can see, starting off the slideshow, we have the streetcar and we have the brick paved streets at that early time period, with a very small population, of course. And of course, if you're familiar with the channel, you'll know that these streetcars were a part of the infrastructure in almost every city that we've looked at here on the channel. And after Texas fights its War of Independence against Mexico, that would have been 1835, 1836. 1839, the location that is now Austin was first named Waterloo, but shortly after, because of Mr. Stephen F. Austin, they changed the name to Austin, Texas. And even in this early time period, we've got the large structure on the hill here. And what's being shown to us are single-story, gable-roofed buildings. Even in the drawing, we've got a very wide main thoroughfare. So I obviously don't trust the renderings from the past at all. But even then, it can't seem to hide certain parts of the narrative. And my hypothesis is that many of these structures are much older than we are being told. And in fact, we are living in a time where our perception of history is actually just a reset narrative handed down to us by the parasitic entities that have controlled this realm for the last roughly 200 years, let's say. And if all that is too much for you, this is probably not the video or the channel for you. You can go back to your regularly scheduled programming. We look at a few of the old street scene here, a few buildings from the old street scenes. You can see the modern buildings in the background. And modern Austin looking more like this, with the modern day steel and glass skyscrapers. These steel and glass skyscrapers, what I consider to be parasitic architecture, all coming into being after the major hinge point of the 20th century, completion of WW2. But we're going back in time now, and we already got an insane asylum. You could see built at a very early time period in Austin, when the narrative tells us that the population was somewhere under 3,000 people, yet they felt the need to build an asylum, apparently. And we're also told that it was added onto in the 1890s, when there was about 15,000 people living there at the time. But this is the case no matter where you look. You have massive structures used to hold who were considered to be insane for the time. Now, who's making this designation of insanity? Who is labeling the people fit to be held in these institutions? This is all a part of that parasitic entities that were resetting the population of the realm, and anyone who was not playing ball with the new narrative ended up in these facilities. That's my contention. And I've been researching asylums quite a bit lately. There'll be a forthcoming video on those, and it'll probably blow you away to know how many of these types of structures existed just in North America alone, let alone the realm. And when we look at the architecture, we're looking at these multi-storied structures. Remember 1850, less than 3,000 people living in Austin. Multi-storied structures, domes, cupolas, everything ornately finished. Very laborious work, to say the least, and certainly not making any sense when you compare that with the population and the technology of the time. The suggestion and implication being that there was a previous civilization before this reset, that had technology and a completely different outlook, potentially a completely different way of being than what we are familiar with in the modern day. Nothing but castles. Stone castles, very, very accurate architecture, very, very accurate stonework for that very early time period, when they'll tell us they were in those single-story gable-roofed structures. This is what we're actually seeing when we look at some of the evidence, and I definitely suggest that much of the evidence of what was once there has been destroyed, and even down to the photographic evidence itself. I think it's scarce, but we do have some. And we get evidence of strange infrastructure. Here we have the Barton Creek Bridge, stone structure, solitary figure sitting on top. Really makes you wonder what was there and what this all may have looked like. Not making any sense, of course. We come to the magnificent Texas State Capitol building. Interesting narrative behind that one. Oh, that one didn't load. Let's get to this one. This one is a classic photo I have shown on the channel in the past, just to juxtapose the mode of transportation in that early time period and the imposing figure of the structure in the background. And I'll quickly show you the previous state capitol building, we are told. And this is all a part of laying down the narrative, telling us that there was a previous structure on the same site, so it had to have been built when we are told. Now let's look a little bit more narrative of the state capitol. So the timeline on the current structure, we're told it was designed in 1881 by Elijah E. Myers, responsible for several other state capitol structures, and then built over the duration of 1882 to 1888. And this is sort of how the story goes for many courthouses and capitol buildings. They'll tell us that the current capitol is the fourth building to serve that purpose in Austin. The first one was just a 2-room wooden structure. So this is, again, laying that chronology as we're expected to believe it. Now the second one that I just showed you, we're told is built of limestone, destroyed by fire in 1881, but thankfully and luckily Elijah Myers had already gotten to work on plans to replace it before the fire struck. I've read this story, this pattern of storytelling, many, many times, and it starts to read like lazy fiction, as far as I'm concerned. They also have a temporary capitol that was said to have been built, but also burned down by fire in 1899. And just a couple more points before we move back to the visuals. We're looking at a cornerstone laying of the current state capitol, March 2nd, 1885. And we're told that this building was opened to the public on April 21st, 1888. So we're looking at a 3-year window before it was open to the public. Of course, the laying of the cornerstone implying that from the ground up it still has not been built, which is interesting to say the least. So they're giving a 3-year window for the below ground construction, and then they're giving us a 3-year window for the above ground construction. Interesting photo, all a part of the inheritor's narrative. I would suggest an awful looking statue, certainly not fitting the architecture we see in the background. All a part of laying out that storyline and chronology, I would suggest. And there it is in all its glory. Magnificent structure, stone structure, made of a lot of pink granite. We can see here in the foreground, we're told this was a 1993, I think, underground expansion. I suspect that there was underground infrastructure already intact, and then this was a timeline where they decided to renovate all of that. That's obviously just speculation, but we see a lot of these same stories repeat themselves with these capitol buildings. Remember 1880s, there's the spiral stairs going up to the underside of the dome. 1880s in Austin, when the population was less than 15,000 people. They were able to construct this in 3 years. Part of the narrative actually says that they had 900 people working on this, 80 of whom were brought in from Scotland. So we have to thank the Scots for coming over and doing a lot of the technical work, I suppose. Yeah, the narrative seems to repeat itself over and over. Moving on, we do have several train stations in this slideshow. The Central Rail Depot. We're always looking for the domes, arch windows, columns, and of course that very heavy building materials, the stones, the bricks, all of the things that are very cumbersome, labor intensive. And you can see what has happened to this down through time. They remove the dome portion, and so as not to catch your eye, I would suggest, before they tear it down. I'm not sure if this one still stands, but it's par for the course, as they say. First Baptist Church, looking like it could easily be a government building, but not in this case. And we'll roll through a series of churches, some of them having this nice stone look, and of course the little pointies, if you will. And no doubt that part of this was removed, whether it was a peak or a dome. Probably not a dome, maybe a peaked roof of some sort. The theory being that many of these are remnants of old world structures and have been repurposed by these religious institutions. You can see the quality of the architecture itself, even the curb work here, the stone curb work. And just hold in your mind that very, very low population. You know, this is not a large city by any means at the turn of the 20th century. The City Hall and Fire Department, there it is again. And I do suspect a lot of this area has been removed from all memory. Here's the modern City Hall. Classic brutalist architecture. And the old City Hospital, well, looks like maybe a portion of a larger structure, potentially. Just speculating. And a nice street scene again, that very wide street, and the Capitol building in the background. This one has almost been erased from memory. There's only really a few postcards available online if you do a search for this. Built in the 1870s when the population was roughly 12,000, and it is long gone as well. I don't have the demolition date on it. We have another photograph of a flower parade. Something I think they do in some of these areas, especially in the southern regions of the States, and there it is in the background. Wonderful looking, really French style, you might say, mansard roofs, French style courthouse. The Deaf and Dumb Asylum, this one going way back as well, and notice how many children are pictured here, syncing up really well with the orphan narrative, the reset and repopulation narrative that was is really a gaining ground. This, as we look more into the past, we start to see all of these things, these narratives repeat, and it's really building, I think. Built in 1857, when you have less than 3,000 people. Once again, you can see what they've done here. Similar, they've taken the peak off of these two towers, once existed. And I wonder if in this photograph we're looking at the orphans having grown, how many generations of orphans were brought through until the memory was erased, how many were killed off in wars. Not a nice thing to think about, but I think it's important for us to come to grips with the past of this place. 1873, we're looking at a bird's eye, about 5,000 people living there. Again, they're showing us a very well laid out rectangle, basically, and they're showing us likely that state capitol and a bit of a main thoroughfare. But again, I would suspect we're looking at fiction, looking at this drawing. Very nice looking hotel. The Driscoll Hotel still stands in Austin. I'd imagine it cost you a pretty penny to spend a night in this hotel. You can see some of the interior in the modern day, built in the 1880s. With such a very low population, so much work going on in that time period. They've crammed too much into too short a period of time. And this really giving you a sense of the quality of building materials on the exterior as well. And they're really not a very good sign, looking like an afterthought, this portion up here, when compared to the architecture, and also the date at the top. They always like to tell us the dates these things were built. It's like it needs to be pounded into our heads when these things were built, so we don't question that. Very early time period for the first national bank here, built in 1868 when there's only 4,000 people living there. Everyone else, I guess, would be living in single-story shacks, and you have this bank structure, I would say remnant of the old world. They're telling us it was replaced by this. I suspect they both existed. 1896, looking very, what they might say, Richardsonian Romanesque. And just a quick shot of the interior of this bank, looking very bleak, like it's been whitewashed. In these areas, I suspect it probably had a much more ornate ceiling. You can see in the foreground how decorative the desk work is here. The Governor's Mansion, built in the 1850s. Some people don't like it when you question history. They've hung their hat and they anchor everything they understand about this world on the history that we have been taught. And these historical narratives are repeated to us when you go to these places, and what we learn in school, and it becomes a part of our identity. So sometimes people will take offense when you start to question the narrative, but I think it's important that we do so. Here's the Granite Dam. It was built in the 1890s, early 1890s, we're told, destroyed in a flood only 7 years after it was completed. And I don't believe that for a second. I think we're looking at a very old infrastructure, much like the Roosevelt Dam I covered. I believe it's in Arizona. I did a video on it some time back. Maybe I'll link that in the description. It was once a granite dam and it has been refaced with concrete. This one looks like it has been destroyed, and literally destroyed. The way that it was, here, I think I have more photographs. Of course, they're telling us this is how they built it. Hard to believe. There, and looking like it was actually destroyed, and not by a flood, but it was actually erased from history, basically. And we were given a narrative that it only was in use for 7 years. Even the structure next to the dam, built right into the water, looking very old. You can see here on the side. This is supposedly the construction. This is supposedly the very early stages, looking very strange the way this is all layered like this. So I think we have some trickery afoot here. And they give us 1892, the last granite block being laid. So believe it if you like, but I don't. I think this is much older and very intricate infrastructure here, the way that they've got the curves. And there's that structure right on the water as well. We see this in a lot of locations, this type of infrastructure. Here's an old high school. I'm not sure which one, but I wanted to highlight this photograph just to show you the size of the blocks. And I do have a couple other high schools. This might be a newer one, but I wanted to include it. Nice looking structure. Interesting one here as well. Very curved section, several domes for a high school. It's a lot of work to go to. I think we're looking at repurposed buildings that were used to educate the populations of the time to the new way of thinking. The Hotel Stephen may also be New World, a blend or a hybrid. Often these structures are built on existing infrastructure, and the lower levels are repurposed and then built upon. It seems to be. The Great Northern Railroad Depot, there's another one with a cone, worthy of inclusion. In a similar fashion, potentially the Littlefield building. I have several photographs of this. Here's another one, looking very very ornate, and another one. So nice looking structure. Feels like something next to it has been removed. And another nice look at the streetcar setup, and all of the wires, I suspect, were added after the fact when they figured out how to get the infrastructure working again. Of course, the narrative will tell us that originally these were pulled by horses, and then all of a sudden the magic invention of electricity came about, and just with the snap of your finger, it was available to everyone all over the place. Here's the Opera House. Let's take a look at it, what it once looked like. The Millet Opera House, 1878. I guess they needed opera in Austin when there's only 10,000 people living there. And it still stands. Doesn't look like the same structure, not sure what's happened to it. We have a castle nearby, the Pemberton Castle. This one looking very damaged. You can see the mixed medium going on here on the structure itself. The detailing here not making a lot of sense when you combine that with the roughness of the stonework, and then of course the variety of building materials if you're trying to fit it into the historical narrative. My suggestion is that this has been heat damaged or electrification damaged, if that makes sense. This gets into the potential cataclysm that occurred that happened to this realm, and there are noticeable effects on many structures and within what we call nature itself. I think all of that has been altered and obscured from our perception. The old post office and temple here you can see, I think it was used for both, although this one says the temple's in the rear. I think it's the back portion. Again, dating back to the 1870s when there's 10,000 people living there. There's another look, and one more, maybe a better look, just to show you again the size of the blocks. You really have to imagine the labor and skill that would have to have gone into this. Maybe the Scotsmen were around before the state capitol was built, and they were laying this stone as well. Silly story. Yeah, I think you can get a little bit of... hard to say, but I would suspect we're looking at brick paved streets with a layer of dirt over them. The St. Mary's Cathedral, also built in that early time period, 1872, about 6,000 people living there. And do you know any towns of 6,000 people that would even attempt to build a church like this in the modern day? With the cymatic window, of course. All repurposed from the old world. Look at the detailing going on here. 6,000 people in the 1870s in Austin, Texas, and they decide to build this. They have the skill set, they have the means to transport the material. I think you have to give your head a shake if you're still buying that story. Very, very detailed work going on here. Very high level of skill set. Even the roof portions themselves are stone, and this one looks like it's probably a hexagon. That's very, very difficult to achieve. 1874 in Austin, Texas. More streetcars. Very prominent part of the early transportation, even the early portions of the New World, post-reset, until we get the internal combustion engine going. And it's really not until the mid-20th century that you get the big push from the higher levels of government to implement the highways and start paving the streets. And that's where the brick gets covered up, and then the streetcars finally meet their demise in much the same way that the Hindenburg did away with dirigible travel. And really, I guess even how the Titanic did away with steam-powered sea travel. All old modes of transportation, old world modes of transportation, I would suggest. So we're seeing a few structures now as a part of the University of Austin, Texas. University of Texas, I suppose. They all have these auditoriums, and many have hypothesized that potentially these structures were used to house the dirigibles. Interesting thought. Just several postcards until we get to this beauty, the Old Main building. An absolute stunner. And this photograph, this color photograph, giving us an idea of what the roof portions may have looked like and how detailed that was. I do have some timeline here for you. Here we have the Old Main, built in 1882. They demolished in 1934, very early time period. Only 12,000 people living there at the time. Also building the state capitol, by the way. That very early portion of the state capitol construction, they're just finishing this off, we're told. So why did they need to bring the Scots in if they were capable of building like this? We also have this interesting photo. They're trying to tell us that originally it was built with just one wing, and this part here was added onto, you can see on the right. Now this happens a lot as well, where they tell us these were built in stages, and often we're provided with photographs, but if you look at this portion here really does not make sense when you put that together with the way the rest of the building was constructed. Why wouldn't they continue the windows? Why did they just put these windows in and this door? This to me looks like it has been altered. So let me know what you think in the comment section. If there's something wrong with this photograph, or you think that is everything's on the up and up, and this is the way it was constructed. To me, it's something feels off. There again is the Old Main, and you can actually see the symmetry in this photograph here. Why on earth they would ever only build the left-hand portion as we're looking at it, and not the right hand, and actually finish it off for use, when you could see how symmetrical it is with the fountain here and all the rest of it. I think it's, again, it's fiction. Amazing looking structure. Demolished in 1934 and replaced by this tower, and using, again, what I would suggest is that same footprint, the lower reaches of the previous Old Main and whatever might exist below it. And this is what the new tower from the 30s looked like. But we move on to another building as a part of the university, and this one having a bit of a mud flood look to it. Just doesn't look right with the windows down below here. Maybe it's a slope, but even so, interesting. And we'll finish, I suppose, with the new tower that replaced the... No, you know what? We're not going to finish with the new one. Let's finish with the Old Main. So Austin, Texas, very small town at the turn of the 20th century, showing us a lot of interesting architecture, a lot of very well-built stone structures, streetcars in full effect. Old world city in my estimation. Let me know what you think in the comments section, and I appreciate you watching. This has been an old world exploration. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe, hit the thumbs up button, and comment. I believe we are in the process of remembering who we really are and casting off the shackles of illusion. Until next time.